Tim Smith of the Smith Group here at Sin in Newport presenting our podcast, RUHM, where we're here to highlight and expose to the world the amazing people, places, properties, and stories of Southern California. Today, I'm excited to announce my guest, Reed Dickens, from the Bayou to the White House to LA Golf. Can't wait to chat. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. It's fun.
Yeah, so to start, before we get into details, I just want to kind of talk about what brought you to Newport Beach, because this is a destination spot where the eyes of the world are now on it. The first 20 years in my career, we always got overlooked for bigger markets like LA, Malibu, Montecito, Miami, New York. But I think specifically because of COVID and the paradigm shift to focus on safety, lifestyle, climate, people are coming here that we've never seen before. So what brought you? Obviously grew up in Louisiana, had a very interesting life and career politics. What brought you to Orange County?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Saved by the Bell. They were doing school on the beach. I couldn't figure out why they got to do that, and I literally was obsessed with LA. But I was working in government when I was my first job out of college, and I actually flew in with President Bush. My first trip to California, we landed on Marine One on the St. Regis golf course for the grand opening in May of 2001. And as the helicopter was landing, I told everyone in the helicopter, I said, I'm going to move here, meet a girl, start a company, and never talk to you guys again. And they all laughed. And 4 years later, I did just that.
And this is when you're single, not working. Had you been here before?
No, it was my first time to ever go to California.
And this is when you came to Paul and Hottie's grand opening, the St. Regis?
And we were literally landing, hovering down over the golf course, and all I could see for miles was golf courses and beach and ocean. Yeah. And I fell
Smitten.
in love. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so father of four, husband, I know how busy it is. I have two. What are some local things you guys love to do here? Restaurants, what are you guys doing on weekends? Just to give kind of the listeners, like, what's the Orange County vibe?
What's funny is our favorite thing to do as a family, we did it this past Sunday, is going to the little park right there in Corona Del Mar that looks out over the ocean. And it blows my mind that there's a park where you can we have a picnic, we throw the football, we just lay in the grass. We spent 3.5 hours.
Right there at Inspiration Point.
Right there, yeah. And just looking out over the ocean. And it blows my mind because I'd never seen the ocean until I was probably 18.
Yeah.
And so that's our favorite thing to do. We take advantage of all the parks on Bison and CDM all over.
It's funny you say that. When I was 13, I moved from Utah to California. I remember we went to the beach for the first time and we went down Marguerite. And I don't know why I was so the palm trees blew my mind. Like, we didn't have palm trees. We didn't have the ocean. I'd been in the ocean, so I totally relate that. Okay, date night restaurant. Where are you going?
We're pretty lazy. Bandera every time.
Okay, Bandera. We just had that. Okay, what are you doing? Breakfast, coffee?
So it's funny. We'll do a lot of Rose Cafe.
Yeah.
But pickup.
Yeah.
We'll bring a Rose Cafe. We love
$20 burritos.
We love to eat in our backyard. But I think it's funny, for breakfast, we love to bring breakfast home. We go to Sidecar Donuts, we go to Rose Cafe, and bring it back and have it in the backyard.
So being in the golf industry, best golf courses in Orange County, your favorite?
I actually am a huge fan of Pelican Hill.
Yeah.
I've been hosting board meetings and investor events, and I've been hosting events there for 17 years for all three of my companies. And I think it's one of the most underrated golf courses in California, let alone Orange County. I think it's the Pebble Beach of Southern California. And obviously it's irritating sometimes because there's a lot of tourists and people don't fix their ball marks, etc. But I think the North Course at Pelican Hill is as difficult from the tips as any golf course in Southern California.
Yeah, private club. What would you say private club in Orange County, your favorite?
I'm actually a fan of Shady Canyon.
Okay.
I like the membership there. I've played, I have friends and partners and investors at Newport Beach Country Club and pretty much everywhere, but just because I work in the industry. But Shady Canyon, I think, is a great hang.
It's a great membership, but it's a great flavor being so close to the beach. It feels like you just have space forever, which is unusual.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a little bit of history. Grew up in Louisiana. I love the line that I read, from the Bayou to the White House. Give us a little bit of the childhood. And really the thing for me is, how did a kid from Louisiana, one of 5 boys, end up in the White House? Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, it's really, I was a big believer in manifestation and visualization before I knew what those words meant. I didn't even know what that was, but I would sit in my house when I was a kid, wondering where every plane that flew over, every car that drove by, where are they going and how do they get there? I was actually walking through. First I went to visit Air Force Academy to see a friend graduate when I was about 16, and I saw Bill Clinton's helicopters land in the parking lot. I told my friend that I was with, I said, I'm going to do that one day. He was getting off the helicopter, talking, like yelling at all these young people, and they were on 2 cell phones, and they looked like they were just doing something meaningful. And I said to my friend, I'm going to do that one day. And he said, do what? I said, work for a president. He said, how? I said, I don't know. I didn't even know what a Republican or Democrat was, and didn't know anyone in politics. And I always loved to tell that story because 6 years later, I landed in that same parking lot on the same helicopter with the next president.
So you're literally at a graduation, and you knew the president was coming, or you didn't?
Yeah, he was speaking at graduation.
Okay, so he's coming down, and you're actually like watching this, and you can remember the feeling, and you just said,
like
I'm going to do this.
The helicopters, they do this shell game. And so 4 come in and then 4 come in. They kind of keep switching for security reasons. And I was just mesmerized. And I told my friend. And so apparently my mom found a notebook after that said Pathway to the White House. I went home and bought a notebook that said Pathway to the White House. And I just started writing down names, people that I knew. But the end of the story, or I guess the beginning of the story, is I was walking down the hall at LSU, and I see an article on the wall. And it was a photo of interns taking a picture with a congressman. And it didn't really click for me that Congress and the White House were even different things.
Yeah.
I didn't know really anything about government. And so I said to the professor, I said, how do I do that? And he said, you can't. And I said, well, what if I want to? And he said, you can't. It's just for donors' kids. He said, only donors' kids get internships. And so I went home and I got in the blue pages of the phone book, for those of you who have seen a phone book. And I called my congressman's office pretty much every morning for a month. And they finally called me back and said, you can come up between August 1st and August 10th. And I now know that's not even a real internship. And Congress is in recess, and the congressman wasn't even going to be there. But I wouldn't stop calling. So I hung up, and I was in panic because I didn't have any money. So I went to the grocery store and bought American flag stationery, and I used my grandmother's typewriter because we didn't have a computer, and sent out letters to everyone I had ever met in my life and said, the United States Congress has chosen me to come to Washington, D.C. And I wasn't BSing because I felt like that.
Yeah.
And that's the key to fundraising in politics, right?
Yeah,
You just got to believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I
it's almost like you're faking it till you make it, but it's like.
But I was sincere. And so I wrote this letter, and I got about $4,000 in the mail. No check was larger than $50. And I bought a plane ticket, a suit, 4 ties, a shirt, some shoes, and a dorm at George Washington University. And I went up there for, 2 weeks. And there was this one lady sitting in the corner while everyone, you'd be horrified to see what people do on Capitol Hill, right? It's a bunch of youngsters who've never had jobs in the real world playing fantasy sports all day. And so this one lady was doing real substantive, serious work. And I pulled my chair up next to her, and I just asked her questions. Well, 2 years later, she sends out an all inbox email saying, George W. Bush is looking for policy advisors. Well, I was like, I'm right here. So I wrote letters and kept getting rejection letters back from the Bush campaign. And I emailed her probably 50 times, and she never responded. So I finally tried a dating tactic and said, I'm going to come intern on the Bush campaign. I'd love to see you. And she wrote back and said, come say hi. So I printed that out, drove to Austin. I had about $300 to my name. And I told the security guard I've got an appointment with Sally Canfield. And I say her name every time. We love telling each other stories because it's a great story, 22 years later. And I walked inside, and they were handing out intern badges, and the lady said, Sally Canfield doesn't have interns, and she's my roommate. I know she doesn't. And I got a cold chill. I thought I had been exposed already. But I went up to Sally's desk, and Sally came in, happened to pass through the lobby. It's one of those movie moments you can't make up. She hugged me and said, I've got to run to a meeting. And so the lady went, okay, and handed me an intern badge. Long story short, I ran out of money, put on a suit, and knocked on every seat.
Okay, wait. There's a lot to unpack. Yeah. So the first thing is, let's go back to the visualization. Mm-hmm. You see this. As a kid, it sounds like, hey, you grew up in Louisiana, like you were looking for a way to kind of get out. Spread your wings, right? So there was probably a million things that you wanted to do. Why did this one stick, and why did you stick with this particular?
It's interesting. I don't know. I had this horrifying realization at about a junior in high school, about the time I saw Bill Clinton's helicopters. I had this horrifying realization that my fastball was 83, not 93. And I truly mean that. It was a horrifying realization. I'd spent every day thinking that was my path out. And we were in true poverty. I mean, been evicted from every house, and we're living on food stamps and eating out of church kitchens, and it was a tough go. And I always say we mowed lawns all day, painted houses at night, and then I turned 9. And so it was just a rough go. And my dad worked really hard, but there just weren't a lot of opportunities, pre-internet when a paper mill shut down in a small town. So long story short, I end up over in Austin. I talked my way past a security guard, and I'm volunteering. Well, I ran out of money. So I knocked on every senior advisor's door and said, I need a job. And they said, we're on a hiring freeze. And this one lady said, who are you? Where did you come from? And every other intern there, and I mean everyone, was Stanford, Harvard, Yale. Their parents went to school.
All Ivy League.
Their parents all went to school with George W. Bush, or one of my friends.
Nepotism.
One of my friends' dad owned the building. Like there was no normal kids there. And she said, and I got cold chills again. I thought I've been exposed again, and I felt like Frank Abagnale on Catch Me If You Can. And she said,
it's like imposter syndrome, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you snuck in here and they're going to realize.
But I did feel that way because I didn't know anyone. And so she said, wait right here. She comes back 30 minutes later and she said, you have a job. She said, I assume you've taken accounting classes. And I said, no. And she said, I assume you've taken business classes. I said, no. And she went,
but this is all post-college.
Right. And she said, well, I had a worthless PR degree, right?
Yeah.
She goes, well, congratulations, you've got a job in finance on the Bush campaign. And she said, I think you're a cork. And she said, corks are people who float to the top no matter what. And she said, I want to be part of your story. So I always mention.
Okay, wait, stop. There's so much to unpack there. Okay, so you're going back as a kid, you're thinking, I'm going to be a baseball player. It's my dream.
Absolutely.
But then you had this realization, I'm not like, as a young kid, I'm not going to make it. I don't have what it takes. And I had one of those experiences with basketball. I realized I'm just not as athletic as much as I want to be it. I have to be honest with myself. I'm not going to do it. You visualize, but the thing that I think is interesting about what the listeners are feeling, I think everybody thinks that like people get in these great spots and it's just like this easy, perfect path going there. But it sounds like from a couple of experiences, you had these mortifying experiences like I've snuck in. But what gave you at those times kind of the grit and the gumption to keep on going after it? Because it could have been just as easy for you to end that story and still be in Monroe, Louisiana, and not have doing that. What gave you that?
It's interesting. I really think my dad was obsessed with excellence and not being mediocre, and he pushed us to work hard. But we all know hard work doesn't get you out of small towns. And I think I operated then like I operate to this day with visuals. I had a visual of those people getting out of that presidential helicopter with the President of the United States. And I kind of feel like that drew me to every little crack and door that opened or didn't open.
In the visuals that you're having, is this something that it's like because I mean, in our minds, we're playing things all the time. The movie theater of our minds are playing things. Are you affirming that I'm doing this? Is this something you're obsessing over at night, during the day, all the time?
Yeah, I was pretty determined that I wanted to work in DC. I wanted to work, and when I was a Time magazine my senior year in college, and I remember it said Governor Bush, of Texas, running for president, and I did the math in my head. I was like, that's 5 hours from where I am. I can drive there, and so I knew I could get there. And I drove over to Austin and talked my way past the security guard and got in the door. And I really, to this day, believe removing yourself from whatever environment you're in and putting yourself in another environment is probably the most important decisions, probably the 3 or 4 most important decisions of my whole life, other than, who you marry, is removing myself from those situations and putting myself in a different geographic environment around different people who are going somewhere. Warren Buffett always says 50% of success is hard work, and the other 50% is whose train you get on. And I wanted to get on someone's train, right? Going to the.
But it's almost like you weren't getting on somebody's train. You were taking your own transportation there. And there's a common theme in a lot of these podcasts we've done, like physically taking yourself into a new situation, which I think a lot of people have a hard time. Nobody likes to go into the unknown, and people just want to stay comfortable.
When you have to face your fears and all your insecurities, I knew nothing about politics. I didn't know anyone in politics. I had a terrible education. I didn't know how to type. I didn't even know how to use Google. Like I really didn't have even basic tools that all these other kids, even my wife she grew up in, born in Sweden, grew up in Boston, went to Harvard. She had computers built into her desk when she was in 3rd grade. LSU got computers my senior year. I didn't even have basic tools. So I go over there and I finally put myself in the situation, which is where I wanted to be, right? In Governor Bush's presidential headquarters campaign headquarters. But when I got there, it just exposed that I didn't have what it took.
Right.
But at the same time, the M&M line, success was my only option, right? I didn't have any.
Yeah.
I didn't have a choice, and so I really made it a point to meet everyone I could. I was in charge of handing out petty cash, so I would deliver it around the campaign headquarters and meet every division director and meet every person I could. And one of the people I met, his name was Ken Melman, who's now
yeah, of course.
And Ken made me his assistant, took me to the Florida recount, and made me his assistant. And then when it was over,
okay, I just want it because like this is like such a big thought, like the physical, and I think this for everybody in life. I heard a quote, it's only the view from where you sit that makes you feel defeat. Life is full of many aisles. Why don't you change your seat? Like the physical, you changing your seat and you saying, and I think we all feel this way when we grow out of something and we're growing into something, we realize that we actually have to create a new set of skill sets. But going back to the cork thought, so the cork will always rise to the top. What happened after that? So you snuck yourself into an internship.
Right.
And then what
she gave me a real job, and my
was a real job, a real paying job?
Yeah, a paying job. Okay. And I was out of money.
And this is the first job out of college.
Yeah, and I was out of money. I was living on a stranger's couch. In presidential city campaign cities, a lot of people volunteer to host people, and so I was living on the stranger's couch and didn't have money to pay them rent. And she gives me this job in finance, and I was supposed to reconcile the checks every day for 3 or 4 divisions, and my checks never reconciled one single day.
Yeah,
I was really a terrible employee, but I entertained everyone, and but I met Ken Melman, and he changed my life. He made me his.
And what was that meeting like? Those little those opportunities, like when you met Ken. Give us a little bit more of the setting. I was
always networking and meeting people inside the headquarters, and he asked me one day. He called me Chief, and he said, "Chief, what's your name?" And I said, "Reed Dickens." He said he told his executive assistant to put a chair outside of his office. He said, you're with me. He said, I'm taking you. So when everyone was leaving for the Florida recount, my division, the division I worked in, was staying behind to do the financial audit.
Yeah.
My division wasn't going to the Florida recount. And he said, you're going with me. And so he,
did that create rifts with your former?
No, she thought it was a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I remember asking Ben Ginsberg, our campaign counsel, I said, do you think I should leave? I said, I was going to get double pay to stay behind and do the audit. And he goes, history is being made. That was the first time we thought democracy was coming unraveled.
Yeah.
He said, this is history being made. You need to go. So I went with Ken, and he kind of used me as a sidekick. I drove Secretary James Baker to his interviews every morning, and I was kind of the little gopher, doing
whatever they
campaign
gave.
headquarters. I remember going to Walmart at 3 a.m. in the pouring down rain to buy them all underwear and T-shirts. We thought we'd be there for 3 days. We were there for 36 days. And so I was kind of the sidekick for Secretary Baker and Margaret Tutwiler and Ken Melman. And when it was over, Ken Melman called me in and said, what do you want to do? And I said, I'd like to work in PR, I guess, in communications. And I assumed they were going to, if I got a job in the administration, I assumed they were going to put me in the basement of Veterans Affairs or some department agency. And I went home for Christmas, and I got a phone call from the White House operator. My dad said, I think it's a prank call. He says the White House operator, and it was Ari Fleischer. And he said, hey, meet me at the corner of 17th and G Monday morning. I've got you, you're going to, and I didn't even know that was the White House.
Yeah.
So I flew to DC, and Ari Fleischer came out to meet me and walked me in through the old executive building and in through the West Wing. And my little office was 20 feet from the Oval Office. And next thing you know, I was in the Oval Office, multiple times a day, shuffling the press in and out of the Oval Office. And so I became Ari Fleischer's press aide. And then after 9/11, they had shut down our West Wing. People, mid-level and senior level people were having to be escorted into the West Wing because of 9/11.
Yeah.
And that kind of irritated President Bush. And so they called my desk one morning, and they're like, President Bush wants to see you. So I went in there.
And you had met him before, right? Before that moment, had you met President Bush? Because you were in the...
but only briefly in the campaign headquarters, because he was the governor and running for president. He was on the road.
Yeah.
And I wasn't on the travel squad in Austin. So I got called in the Oval Office, and he was asking me what stories they were working on. And
was that a surreal moment when you're sitting in there?
So I get called in there. And so he invited me to go play golf with him one Sunday. He started, I started I got to go running with him at his ranch in Texas. And so he kind of like...
How did everybody feel that was in your positions? They're like, what has Reed got? What?
Well, it was interesting because there were dozens of kids who on the campaign who all had worked in communications and wanted those few roles that had those few roles had real estate in the West Wing, right? And everybody else was in the old executive building.
Right.
So I really did get a dream job, right? And after 9/11, the White House assistant press secretary, he was leaving to go with the startup of Homeland Security Department. And so I found out I was going to be getting promoted. And that's kind of like the White House assistant press secretary has a seat on Air Force One, is in kind of the president's, travel bubble. And it was a really surreal moment. Ari Fleischer announced me to the White House press corps. I got a standing ovation, a curtain call. I went out and
he said, what did he say specifically?
Just a personnel announcement. Announced that Reed Dickens is going to be the new White House assistant press secretary. And I remember Mike Allen, I think one of the founders of Axios. He gave me the pool report. I think Dana Milbank from Washington Post at the time wrote it, and it just said, Dickens came out for a curtain call, and I got a standing ovation, and I became that role. And so, right after that, and President Bush invited me to go play golf with him. Soon after that, and
at the time, were you a good golfer?
No. And it was nerve-wracking. I almost threw up on the way to because I was usually helping wrangle the press corps on the first tee box while he was playing golf.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was in the foursome, and he walked over to the cameras like, "You guys know this guy?" And he was joking around, but I didn't appreciate at the time. He was giving me his stamp of approval.
Right.
He was giving me credibility.
He was
right?
validation.
He was showing the White House press corps that I know this guy's only 25, but he's part of my circle now, right?
Yeah.
And it was really instinctive of him to do that. But what's funny is when he went to throw the first pitch out after 9/11 at the World Series at Yankee Stadium, I did my first official. It wasn't fancy, but it was my first official White House briefing on the field behind home plate that night. Ari Fleischer didn't go that night, and he threw the pitch. And the female reporter didn't know much about baseball, and she said, "What was the pitch?" I said, "It was right down the pipe." And that quote, "It was right down the pipe," was on thousands of newspapers all over the world on the front page. That was my first quote as a White House spokesman. So that was one of the most surreal nights of my life.
Yeah. What did your parents say about that? Obviously,
it was surreal to them. Obviously.
Yeah. I mean, was it one of those things though? Like, I mean, being your mom and dad and understanding like you're a visionary, were they surprised? Or were they like, did they always know like you were destined for great things?
It's funny. I think it was surreal to them, but they always kind of felt like, they claim, in fact, a reporter asked my mom after I got that job in the West Wing, what was Reed like when he was younger? And she said, shorter. I was always driven and kind of focused on my plan, right? And I had always had a plan to do that. Now, looking back, the odds of that were minuscule that it would actually materialize, but it was a really surreal moment. I was actually one of the last people in the Oval Office with him on the night of 9/11. I brought the reporters in. He did his address to the nation, and the reporters all left, and I was waiting in the doorway of the Oval Office between the Rose Garden and the Oval Office, waiting for one of the producers to unhook the cables. There used to be physical cables, right, to the cameras.
Yeah, for sure.
And
2001.
And he was just chewing on a cigar. And so after everybody was done, he stood in the doorway with me, and there's tanks in the street. It's this eerie quiet. We thought 9/11 was going to be the first of a several wave attack.
Right.
And so we're standing in the doorway of the Oval Office, and I remember not knowing what to say. It was just this total silence, and he just stood next to me, and I said, "You did a good job tonight," as if he needed my affirmation, right? As if he needed a compliment from a 25-year-old. And he looked at me, and he said, "Thank you, Reed." And then he walked. And that visual of him walking back down the colonnade, iconic colonnade to the residence, the visual of him walking back is still the visual of how I choose a president to this day. Because when the world's melting down, you see in the movies all these smart people in suits with their ties loosened, leaning in, having these secret meetings with the president. You picture the president being surrounded by all these smart adults. That night in the Oval Office, he was by himself. And he went to the residence of the White House. There was no one. Everyone was home with their families. And he walked back to the residence of the White House by himself. And the world was melting down. Yeah. And so I always think presidents only matter in a few key moments. And that moment of him being by himself in the Oval Office at night on the night of 9/11 is the visual burned into my mind.
I just can't help but think this because like I'm a film guy, as you know, and that will be my second career. It's almost like, and I know I've heard people compare you to this, I'm almost like visualizing this and seeing almost like your version of a Forrest Gump story of a movie.
Yeah.
Because whether it was baseball or the White House or that didn't work out, it seems like the cork always floats to the top. right?
Listen, I have hundreds of photos. One photo in particular that looks like a Forrest Gump, like I'm superimposed, it was the leadership of Congress, Vice President Cheney, George W. Bush, all sitting around the Oval Office. And it's like all these iconic Colin Powell, Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, the congressional leadership, Senate leadership, all sitting in the Oval Office, and I'm standing holding onto the doorknob with my mouth open. And it just looks like a Forrest.
Right.
It looks like a
Have
Forrest
you been
Gump.
compared to Forrest Gump before?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's fair. I mean, I was a Southerner who wasn't very bright.
Is there something about like a singular focus? I mean, would you say that one of your, superpowers, like the ability and watching that show and watching your career and your life, it seems like whatever you do, you get hyper focused and put everything into it. Where did you learn that? How did you create that?
I always said President Bush modeled, people have asked me so many times, what was the difference between President Bush before 9/11 and after 9/11? And I always say he was disciplined before 9/11. He was ruthlessly disciplined after 9/11. He was always what I call ruthless prioritization. He was a ruthless, the worst position you could have for President Bush was the Department of, Interior or something, right? If you weren't on his 2 or 3 priority list, you didn't really get much of his time or brain width, a mind share. I think I read a book probably 2018, 2019 called The One Thing.
Yeah.
And it was about the science of the domino effect.
Yeah.
The word priority.
Remember that, the one thing.
The word priority was never a plural word until recent times. It was for thousands of years. It was a Latin word. It was singular. And so I think that concept of having one singular priority at a time, right?
Yeah.
And I always have like a visual for the 5 years. And then I have like a plan for 1 year.
Right.
And I try to make sure that my one thing for each day and my one thing for the week and my one thing for a month kind of aligns with my visual for my one thing.
Is that put down in like, are you doing yearly planning, monthly planning, weekly planning, or are you just innately
I have note cards all over my bathroom mirror. I have my one thing for 5 years, and then I make sure my plan for the year, personally and professionally.
Yeah.
I make sure my one thing for the year, I have a one thing every year, and I make sure that aligns with whatever my one thing for 5 years.
Not 3 or 4, just one. Simple.
And then I try to make sure that that I have one thing every day. Every day when I wake up, my assistant sends me a text with a lot of calls and texts and tasks that need to be done. But I have on Sunday night, I always identify what my one thing for the week is. If nothing else gets done,
what's your one thing for this week and this day?
So for my one thing for today was finalizing wires and closing my bridge round, a capital round I'm raising, and that's aligned with my one thing for the year, which is a larger recapitalization. And my one thing for 5 years is,
So an inherent problem with everybody is choosing what to focus on, what to prioritize.
So
you have 4 kids, you have multiple businesses, you have a million things going on. Like, how do you do that?
So I always have a one thing personally and a one thing professionally.
Yeah.
But I think the book does a great job of defining the one thing. He says that, I'm going blank of his name. He says that if you have a bunch of things that seem important and they seem equally important, there's one of those things that affects the most other things.
Right.
There's one of those things that if you get it done, it's going to make all the other dominoes fall, or it's going to make all the other things easier.
Right.
And so I my one thing for this year is a pretty lofty goal, and my one thing personally has more to do with my family time. But my point is, I have them on my note cards on my mirror in my bathroom every day when I'm brushing my teeth. I read every note card, and there's probably 8 of them on the wall on the mirror, and I read them all. But my point is that there's science. There's a lot of science behind that, right?
Totally.
That if you focus on something and you visualize it and you think about it and you read it every morning, it helps you say no to a lot of things.
We had a lunch years ago at Gary's, and I mean, I will self-esteem. I don't have great ideas. I'm really good at prioritizing, and I hate to say I'm hyper focused on money, but I am, not because I think that I abuse it. I think that it's just a very clean and honest scoreboard.
It's a scorecard. Yeah.
It's a scorecard. Yeah. I know. And
it's fuel.
It's fuel. And I know that like people have such a hard time. For me, it's like, I've been watching this show Alone. I don't know if you've ever watched it. It's where there's 10 survivalists and they're dropped off in Antarctica.
I've heard about it. Yeah.
And I'm like, I've watched all 8 episodes or all 8 seasons. My wife's like, why do you love this show so much? I'm like, because these 8 survivalists or professionals, they're put in like the Arctic, and they go in fall, and they have to make it as long as they can. And there's 10 of them. They don't know how long the other people are making it.
Right.
Some of them are great. They're great at everything. They can make, great homes and do this and do that. But at the end of the day, if they don't eat for 3 days, they're done.
Right.
And so the focus of that thing, that one thing, and it gets really honest there. If you don't eat, you're out.
Right.
But on that, so figuring out a way by design, not by default, to pick that one thing is really challenging for humans.
Well, and he says in the book, sometimes your one thing for a year is finding your one thing. It's not like you go sit in the sauna for 30 minutes inside.
Right.
Sometimes identifying your one thing for the next 5, for the next chapter of your life. I think of life in 5-year increments.
Yeah.
And when I look back at my last 25 years, it really does unfold in about 5-year increments, right?
Right.
Just natural.
Great thought,
And
though,
so
5-year
and so
increments.
but I don't have a 5-year plan. I have a 5-year visual.
Right. Yeah.
And
for sure.
I'm really one of the only private equity guys I know that's never had a financial goal. And you and I remember that conversation too, because I remember I was so struck by the fact that you had financial goals and you usually hit them. And I was thinking, I'm having all these financial problems and I don't have financial goals. But the logic behind it is this: I have visuals because my definition of success is to control my time and environment. So where I am,
wait, slow down. To control your time and your environment.
my definition of success is to have complete control of my time and my environment.
Yeah.
So where I am, who I'm with, and what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And if you live in rural Alabama or Louisiana, that may only take a few $1 million. If you live in Southern California, that may take $50 million. So I don't think a financial metric is the right metric.
Yeah.
I think my visuals for my 5-year is always a visual, because your life circumstances may dictate what amount of liquidity that takes, right?
For sure.
But I always have a 1-year plan, and I always make sure my one thing for the year is something that will solve a lot of the other priorities. So if I have 10 or 8 or 10 really important things, I try to pick something that if I get that one thing done, it's going to make a lot of other dominoes fall.
Tell us how the transition and what happened after the White House.
Yeah, so the White House was such an intense experience, because as much as I may have, Frank Abagnale my way in, surviving in and out of the Oval Office in that environment every day for 4 years was intense. I went to Baghdad, came back, was the national TV spokesman for a re-election campaign. It was just a very intense 4 years. I thought I was going to get fired almost every day. So when
did you really feel
yeah,
that way?
Oh yeah. Because
do people get fired all the time, or was this more of your like?
Out. No, it was part insecurity, but part, every mistake I made, I made some mistakes that embarrassed the president of the United States on live TV. It's like everything feels so consequential, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole world is watching everything you're doing, or so it felt like at the time, right?
Did he ever have to get after you about something?
Oh yeah.
Discipline?
Oh yeah.
And how was he?
Yeah, one of the most intense. In fact, the day I really thought my career was over, I had been bugging him to have this Associated Press reporter come to his ranch, because a lot of the reporters are like, he's a fake cowboy like Ronald Reagan. He's not a real cowboy. This isn't a real ranch. And I kept saying, let's have one of the reporters come out here and chop down cedar trees and run and fish and do all the things we do. So finally one morning he called at 6 a.m. the double wide trailer I was sleeping in, and said, hey, have that reporter out here. Let's have him come work with us today. So my bosses were all out of town. I was the only person really there. The military aide with the nuclear codes, the personal assistant, the doctor, the nurse, and me. I was the only communications person there. So I invited this AP reporter. I didn't really call. I should have called one of my bosses and gotten some guidance, but I was 25 years old. I had it under control.
Yeah.
So I called the reporter out there. Well, probably a couple hours into the day, and it was like 103 degrees. He starts going on a rant about, if I see the president of Turkey, I'm going to stick my goddamn boot in his ass. I'm going to whatever, and I'm going to kick his ass. And
whatever. He
starts ranting to the reporter about one of the countries wouldn't let our planes land north of Iraq, and that's going to get people killed. And he was just ranting about some of these world leaders, the way all presidents do, right?
Yeah.
And he looks at me in the middle of the rant and goes, "This is all off the record, right?" And I got pale because I realized that I had forgotten to tell him, because he was a fairly new president, and I had forgotten to remind him that nothing is off the record when you're president.
Yeah.
And so it turned into a huge drama.
So he printed all that shit.
No. Well, I don't want to get the guy in trouble. He's not a reporter anymore, so I can finally tell this story 21 years later.
Yeah.
We went into a trailer and did a negotiation like you'd see in a movie.
No
and
way.
I even had a conversation with him and reminded him about some personal things that I knew that I mean, I wasn't threatening him, but I mean,
Yeah.
it was both of our careers felt like it was on the line.
Yeah.
And he was a gentleman about it. And so he ended up taking out some of the more incendiary quotes that would have caused international incidents. And so anyway, the president looked at me later. He was having a briefing with his generals on the secure video screens. And he said, well, someone caused an international incident today. And he turned around and stared at me and he was like, but they're not going to be working here much longer. And I was about to throw up because I thought, okay, this is, of all the screw ups, of all my mistakes, this one's actually going to cause international issues. But the story ended up being okay. And he called me out to the truck the next day and he said, he would occasionally jokingly speak in third person about himself. He said, the president wants you to know that you're not getting fired. And the White House chief of staff told me a few weeks later, he said, I've known him for 30 years and I've never seen him apologize to a staffer like that before. Awesome. So yeah, I had some moments that were touch and go.
Yeah. So finishing up the White House, you're very young. I mean, weren't you the youngest?
Yeah. So at the time, one of the youngest, on the record spokespersons
in history, right?
Yeah. At the time. Yeah. I think just the way it worked out. But
you're going from a very high position. You're what, 26, 27 years old?
By the time
and so it's like,
the first term.
Was there some visuals like when you were
I had actually gone to LA a couple times visiting, and my roommate's brother was an actor, and I had kind of gotten my sights set on living in LA. I met my now wife at a party at the Emmys, and she said she lived in LA, and in my mind I was like, I'm in. Yeah. And so we started dating long distance.
Just stop. Side note there. Pack the truck up, move yourself to where you want to be, right?
Exactly. So
like entrepreneur Tim, move yourself physically, move yourself to where you want to be, no matter how insecure you feel, no matter how uncomfortable you feel, that's the way.
So interestingly enough, I didn't even stay for the re-election party. I got in a U-Haul trailer, and the day after the election was over, and drove to LA. I had a girl there. And so President Bush asked me, he said, I hear you're leaving. And I kind of got nervous, and I said, well, I said, my goals in life are to have a family, own my own company, and make money. And I don't feel like I'm getting closer to any of those three goals here in DC. And I feel like I've done everything you could ever dream of.
But that's probably like, when you're in that line of work, you like never leave DC, right?
Right. And most people, no matter how fast they run or how hard they jump, they don't ever get far away from DC, right? They either stay in lobbying or public affairs or PR. And so I said to him, I want to have a business. I want to have a family. And I actually said, this is kind of cute. I want to make $1 million.
Yeah, I want to be a millionaire.
It sounds like so much money. Yeah. And so he said, well, and one of my bosses said, well, turn your phone off and don't let anybody talk you into staying. And so I literally turned my phone off, got in a U-Haul, and drove to LA. And my first business, I didn't know what to do. So I started a crisis management. I was like a Ray Donovan, like a fixer.
Yeah.
And
literally,
yeah. I started a business called Outside Eyes, and I ended up with dozens of A-list celebrities, billionaires, CEOs.
But you just went straight to that. You didn't say, "Hey, I'm going to go look for a job."
No, I tried to find a job, but I was too young for every job I was qualified for. So Disney, a few different places, Motion Picture Association,
because
Disney.
Your pedigree being,
my resume qualified me for these senior level SVP jobs.
Yeah.
But I never forget Zinnia Muka. She was one of Bob Iger's right hand at Disney. She called me and said, "Reed, I don't know how to say this, but all of your direct reports would be in their 50s and 60s, and I just can't put you in this role. Like, you're just too young." And so my resume qualified me for roles I was too young for. I was 27, 28. So I realized there was a disconnect between my...
But you went out there looking to take your experience, your resume, find another job, and you were getting turned down because of age.
Well, I was going for pretty big jobs.
Yeah.
And so I started my own business. In fact, Sophia, my wife...
Just out of default, you're just like, okay.
Yeah, I was just impatient. So I knew that I had some big opportunity. I knew I had a good skill set.
But you weren't married yet. This is when you were
we got married that year.
Okay.
But I realized that I had been managing 24-hour crises at the White House for 3 years during 2 wars.
Problem solving.
I had been the crisis manager in Baghdad. I had all these different experiences. And so Sophia made a voicemail on our answering machine in a British accent, a fake British accent, saying, "This is Outside Eyes." And so I went and spoke at a talent agency. I went and spoke at Athletes First here in Newport Beach, a sports agency.
Yeah.
So Athletes First was my first client, Paradigm Entertainment.
Who was the principal at Athletes First at that
Dave
time?
Dunn, the founder.
Okay.
And so it was my first client. But I started getting just calls, celebrities, scandals, paternity suits, rapes, you name it, financial fraud. And I mean, I ended up with some of the most high profile CEOs, companies, billionaires.
And so when you were getting these problems, like this wasn't a 20-year business. You were just like, okay, here's my team. This is how we solve the problem. Just go with your gut.
It was just me. And I would quote them these outrageous numbers and they would say yes. And I literally didn't even have a bank account set up. So I started a company and it wasn't scalable, but I definitely made my first $1 million.
Sure.
Made my first $1 million handling scandals.
Yeah.
And then got an opportunity to.
Okay, wait, I want to stop there for one second. Yeah. So probably 8 years ago, I was invited to go speak at a real estate conference in Australia with Tom Ferry. Trump was the last speaker, right? Now he spoke over video conferencing, but it's making me think of this. Like he wasn't very relevant. This was 20,000 real estate agents in the South Pacific, right? So he wasn't very relevant. But one thing he said is your ability to make money is directly proportionate to how much pressure you can handle and how good you are at solving problems. And it sounds like, I mean, from a skill set, not only were you able to do that, but it sounds directly like, hey, I don't know what those jobs were paying. They didn't hire you, but making $1 million solving problems, just kicking your seems to be probably a really great substitute, maybe even better than what they could have been.
Oh yeah, of course. And I never have had a W-2 paycheck since. I went on and started a few other businesses, but my first real company, scalable company, was I co-founded Marucci, a baseball bat company with 2 former Major League Baseball players.
Back to your roots.
Right. And they were in Baton Rouge, and I met them. My little brother was the personal assistant to the governor of Louisiana. He connected us because they needed help raising money.
Okay, so give us a little bit more context. So you're doing this crisis management, handling scandals. How did the bat opportunity?
Yeah, so my little brother was working in the governor of Louisiana's office, and my co-founder, he was a former LSU star, former Major League player, pitcher, went in to get advice from the governor, which is a terrible place to get advice on business. And my little brother stepped out and called me and said, you need to meet these guys. They need help building their brand. They owned all this Amish wood. It was harder than Louisville Sluggers ash wood. And he said, they have guys on TV using their bats, but they don't know how to raise money or start a company or build a brand. And so my little brother said, you need to meet this guy. Gave me his email. I cold called him, flew to Baton Rouge. We whiteboarded for about 7 hours on a whiteboard. And we decided that day I was going to raise the money and I was going to be the CEO. And they were going to be the co-founders. And so we started from scratch that day, and we built the most, disruptive brand.
You stayed in LA raising money
at first, but then I ended up moving to Baton Rouge for a few years.
Okay.
But we took 90% of Louisville Sluggers market share in our first 4 years. We put Easton into bankruptcy. We really disrupted the baseball industry. We were very rambunctious about it. And I'm using that same playbook now in golf. Partnering. We got 44 major league players to invest. We made hundreds of videos making fun of Louisville Slugger, and we had a better product. So I kind of
whose idea was all that, and where did you're going from the White House, then you're going for crisis management, then you're going to a bat company that I think eventually sold for like $200 million, right?
Yeah.
And it did replace Louisville Sluggers. What was the skill set, or what did you?
I think it's a combination of again, the same playbook I'm using now. Kurt had the relationships with the players, and he had good wood. We had a good product. So
great
demonstrably better product.
Okay.
And then I was a storyteller who was really comfortable with uncomfortable contrast marketing.
Yeah.
In fact, my own partners and investors would say, you can't make that video.
Yeah.
You can't say that.
Totally.
Like, it's going to offend everyone. I'd be like, well, we just did. We would make fun of college coaches who were getting paid on the side. We'd make fun of Louisville Slugger for their soft wood.
Totally.
And so I was a very aggressive.
Were you, when they were uncomfortable with it, did it make you question whether or not that was the right path to go, or instinctively just like intuition told you?
No, because every other industry does it. Beer, cars, cell phones, everyone else does it.
Yeah.
Baseball.
But it sort of feels like you have to be a really big dog to do it, and you guys were coming like the underdog.
But as the David and Goliath, like I was a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell's version of David and Goliath, right? If you're small and agile and you have speed, right? If you have unconventional weapons and speed, the David wins like 35% of the time, right?
Yeah.
And so we kind of had that freedom and flexibility to be.
Wait, say that again, because I think it's worth saying. The Malcolm Gladwell, if you have speed.
Yeah. So his version, you instinctively would think that in a David and Goliath scenario, he defines Goliath as anyone with 10 times more resources.
Right.
Whether it's war, business, whatever. You would think that David only wins 5% of the time or something. Right. It's a long shot.
Or 1% of the time.
Like a Hail Mary.
Yeah.
But in reality, if you go back 500 years, corporate, war, business, the David wins about a third of the time. And it's because they usually have an unconventional weapon and speed.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what we had. Right. And I actually gave that David and Goliath at our first dinner as co-founders when we started the company. I gave that David and Goliath statistic and that story to my co-founders and their wives, and I made a toast.
That was like the battle cry.
Yeah, and I made a toast, and our toast was to smooth small stones. And
awesome.
and when we sold the company, that was our
to smooth small
Yeah.
stones. I mean, how was like when you gave that speech? Do you feel like it rallied? Everybody became more vested, or was
It did in the moment, but we had a lot of messy times, right? The
Yeah.
NCAA decertified our only 2 products. Every company went around and told Dick's Sporting Goods that we were out of business. I mean, everyone
Yeah.
tried to suffocate us in the crib. But we grinded it out, and it was a messy journey. But now, after that sold, I always joke that I owe everything in my life to politics and baseball, and I never liked politics or baseball. So when Marucci sold, I bought the name LA Golf on GoDaddy for like $10.
Yeah.
And found some bankrupt assets to start building a manufacturing plant from scratch in Anaheim, and really have the same.
Okay, so go back on that a little bit, because I remember years ago when you were just starting this, and we had a couple of conversations. Give us a little bit more of like the environment and the framework. You bought LA Golf. How long before you actually had that opportunity?
No, I started LA Golf from scratch. I bought the name LA Golf on GoDaddy.
Okay.
And I knew I wanted to go into the golf industry. So I was
Yeah.
looking for something to buy.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out. So I bought some equipment out of bankruptcy and started a shaft company from scratch.
Yeah.
But with the vision of replicating Marucci. We're going into every product category.
Got it.
And so, but the playbook we used at Marucci, I kind of had a checklist in my mind, and I've been sticking to that checklist ever since, which is partner with the greatest players,
Yep.
have intellectual property that's demonstrably better, and performance enhancing IP, having a material science story, materials that are different than everybody else. Because there was no regulation that said you had to use this kind of wood, but Louisville Slugger had done it for 100 years.
Right.
There's no regulation that says you have to use solid steel for a putter, but everyone's always done it.
Yeah.
So partner with players, good IP, a material science story, and then build a hot, sexy brand, and then have good gross margins and have everything be simple to manufacture.
So really the thing that drove you, though, you wanted to be in the golf industry,
Yes.
and you looked at other opportunities that didn't work out.
Yeah.
And then you came
I
across.
told one of my friends, I said, what if I could go to Augusta or the US Open or just go play golf with friends and say to my wife, babe, I'm going to work. And we all laughed. And that's honestly was the vision, is that I wanted to do something that I enjoyed every day.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to use the same strategic playbook as we used in Marucci,
Yeah.
but I wanted it to be in an industry. Golf is 13 times larger than baseball.
Right.
And I love it.
Yeah.
So it's a much bigger opportunity. So it's the same strategic playbook, but much bigger addressable market, 14 years more experience, and I have a blast every day.
Yeah. So going back to the opportunity, you said you bought a bunch of equipment out of bankruptcy. Talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about
so it was the only American-made shaft company. They had gone into bankruptcy. And so I bought their equipment from a court-appointed receiver, and I hired the best engineer in the industry, and a few players.
But this is like mind-blowing to people that are listening. Like, it seems like this is like just your skill set is clearly like above. You're at the top of your skill set. To be able to go in and do this seems mind-blowing for just an ordinary person, right? But you're applying the same principles. Some of the opportunities before, what other golf opportunities were you looking at before you
Yeah,
found
I
that?
looked at a simulator technology company, and we got pretty close to getting a deal done, and it fell apart. I looked at a few different deals, mostly golf technology, and when this opportunity came along, I said, no, I don't want to do manufacturing again. And the guy who brought it to me said, I think you're going to like it. It's so similar to Marucci. And sure enough, it's the same materials, same raw materials, very similar to Marucci. And I think manufacturing is romantic. It's like, other than someone hearing music, as Steve Jobs said, other than someone hearing music in their head that no one's ever played before, I think manufacturing, taking raw materials and building something from scratch is a very godlike quality.
Totally.
Right? And I love manufacturing. So I started out with shafts, which is kind of the engine and transmission of the golf club, and no one had innovated shafts in probably 50 years. And then we made a putter.
Who has been making before LA Golf? Like, who's the one that's been dominating the shaft?
There's a few different companies, Fujikura, Mitsubishi, but they all
overseas.
Yeah, but they all mass produce and machine make all their products.
And these are all made here in the U.S.
In Anaheim. Yeah,
In Anaheim.
we're all
right by where you live,
Right.
Orange County. Yeah.
all handmade in America, and so that allowed us to use new materials. Yeah, so material science has advanced. One of our commercial slogans is that material science has advanced exponentially,
Yeah.
but the major brands haven't.
Yeah.
Right, and so we used new material science and new design structures. Bryson DeChambeau was a player who came to us first and said, I want to design my own shaft. So I connected. Bryson DeChambeau is one of the top players in the world, but he's also an engineer by trade.
Right.
And so I connected my engineer and Bryson, and I gave him something no one had ever given him before.
And did he actually reach out to you? Did he know?
Yeah, we got connected because he was intrigued, and so we got connected by mutual relationship. But what I gave, my engineer says this all the time, I gave my head engineer, Jeff Meyer, and Bryson DeChambeau something they had never been given, which was a blank sheet of paper. Yeah. And that's kind of always been
just a white
something
canvas,
I've done, which is, hey, create the best product. And so it's the same thing with putters. Jeff came up with an idea that we could make a putter out of carbon. It's 5 times less dense than steel, so it gives you a bigger sweet spot.
Yeah.
So now every commercial we run is making fun of Scotty Cameron for having a tiny sweet spot, right? And then now we have a ball that just came out, and it's a 4-piece construction, very high-tech ball. So bottom line is we're constantly looking for good IP and good materials, and then we make it cool with funny commercials, and we partner with players. So Dustin Johnson, Michelle Wee, Bryson DeChambeau are our partners. One of my lessons from Marucci is that you don't need 40 pro partners.
You just need
just a few, right? We have the best field player to ever play, other than Tiger probably, the best mechanical player, and then Michelle Wee is best female player in her day. And so we have a great board of directors of players. And so anyway, I've had a blast with LA Golf because I've gotten to take my playbook, a proven playbook that I knew worked, and apply it in an industry that I'm passionate about that's 13 times larger. So the upside's way bigger, and there's a clear pathway for what we're trying to do.
There's one question, because you just said, and I want to go back, you said somebody came to you and said, you're really going to love this. And you're like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, how many times in life are we presented an opportunity because we have an idea of how we want it to look, where we have to be open? Because it seems like, in retrospect, it seems like it was the perfect opportunity, and it's lucky you didn't get in the simulators,
it's a great
right?
Point. It's a great point. I had made up my mind. And it was probably a little ego driven and probably a path of least resistance. I had made up my mind I wanted to go into technology, and that I was done with manufacturing. George W. Bush famously said, when I told him we were starting Marucci, he looked at me, he said, manufacturing? He's like, something goes wrong every day. And I always joke, if I ever get a tattoo, that's what I'll get tattooed on my ribcage. But manufacturing is hard and messy. So the last thing I wanted to do was replicate Marucci, because it was such a hard journey and manufacturing is so messy. But when I got into it, I realized, wait, I've got a playbook. I'm way more experienced. I have better capital partners. I understand how to structure the company where I'm in control. Like, there's so many things.
How long did it take you to come to that after you to put your ego? Like, he brought you this opportunity. Was this weeks, days, months? How long did it take you to come to it?
I knew it was a good asset, so opportunistically. So I moved quickly on the asset. But at first I thought I'm just going to try to flip it or something.
Get in and out.
It took me about a year. And one of my largest investors actually said to me one day, he said, why don't you just rebuild Marucci? And I was kind of embarrassed that he was having to say that to me, because it was like, it's kind of like running from your calling, right? I knew he was right. It's just so hard, right? Marucci was so hard and so messy, but it was also because I didn't know anything about governance, controls, capital structure, fundraising. We were kids. And so it was way messier than it had to be. And I had co-founders. I always tell people, sometimes it's good to have a co-founder, and Kurt Ainsworth, who's now still the CEO of Marucci, he was a phenomenal partner. But at the end of the day, I was like, you know what? I've had a playbook, and I actually know how to structure the company. I have capital relationships to raise money, and I knew that I could do it a lot cleaner, that the playbook would be a lot cleaner, and it has been. It's been fun.
So personally, going back to 2008, selling real estate, I was always better than average at selling, great at relationships, wasn't a great businessman. 2008 came, I had 30 listings, the market, tanked. And I was spending way more than I was making. My assistant came to me and said, you can either pay your rent this month or you can pay me. You can't pay both, but something's got to change. I went, found a real estate coach just to get my head clear, but I still remember he's like, I want you to get into short sales. Like, I want you to get into short sales. That's going to be the future. I'm like, I'm not getting into short sales. I just couldn't put my ego aside. I'm like, I want to sell these luxury, beautiful oceanfront homes. It took me like 2 or 3 months, and then I had this conviction and this feeling that's kind of similar to this. It's like, I actually don't really care what it is. As long as I can serve people, sell homes, and have a great business. I got early on into short sales. I ended up short selling 50% of the coastal homes, and that's what transitioned me in 2012 and 13 to the luxury, because I wasn't luxury. And so it's going back to that point. I think sometimes we have to be able to be open, put our egos aside, because hearing the story, it's like it's a no-brainer. right? You already did it with Marucci, with the bats, right? It's right there. It's an Anaheim-based. I mean, everything about it.
Makes sense in
but it's
hindsight.
funny how sometimes we don't even see what's right in front of us. And entrepreneurial, I think this is humility. This is having the right people around to advise, and the guys that say, "Why don't you just build Marucci bats again?" Right?
And it's so true, because I think, you hear all these cliches like embrace the grind and run to the roar.
Yeah.
And those things are all great on t-shirts and bumper stickers, but in real life, it's hard, right? You think, man, that was a traumatic 10 years.
Totally.
And I want to do something easier. That was my instinct. Everything in me said, I want to do something easier. Like I want to have a software technology company with passive income where I can go play golf. Right? And instead, the pathway, the most direct pathway to building $1 billion company was doing what I'd already done.
Right. You've already learned it, like not starting over. And it's that book. I don't know, whatever you do for 10,000 hours, right? Course, there's something about it. So going back, I want to just point out one more thing, because this has become a theme in a lot of our podcasts. If you choose something you love, doing it all day, you'll never work a day in your life. And so I think it was just a great point for you, like by design, I want to do golf. And now, we don't hang out as much as I'd like to because we have kids, but I watch you on Instagram, like seeing, like I'm literally watching your Instagram when you're at the US Open, when you're doing these things. I'm like, how cool is this? You get to be at all those events doing things I couldn't pay to get into, and you're hanging out with these players. And not only hanging out, when I read what Bryson DeChambeau and these guys are saying about you, they're like, you're like mentors to them.
Well, it also makes me feel old.
Yeah, that's true. But you're not.
No, but it's true. And I'm so grateful. I actually told my wife Saturday morning, I don't like going up to LA. LA golf is based in Beverly Hills, and I don't like going up on the weekends. I try to be careful and just to be home with the kids all weekend. But I had to host a CEO Saturday morning up at Bel Air Country Club, and it was a key moment for me in terms of daily discipline of gratitude exercises. Is because in my mind, I was about to have a self-pity moment, which I think entitlement and self-pity are the two most unexcusable, human emotions, right? The most repulsive human emotions, right?
Yes.
And I was flirting with self-pity, saying like, I've got to go work on a Saturday, right?
Yeah.
And then I
Club.
stopped myself and said, I used to jump the fence at Bel Air Country Club 15 years ago and walk around at night visualizing being a member, right? I used to dream about working in the golf industry, and and so I had to remind myself, I'm going to play golf with a CEO to talk about golf on a Saturday, and so I'm really grateful. It's fun. I'm truly grateful for the experience.
And the name LA Golf, I mean, it just fits, right?
It's funny. I actually bought the name LA Baseball years ago when we were going to try to acquire our competitor Marucci, and I remember then being shocked that it was available. So I remember looking at LA Media, LA Technology, LA, and I was like, and I realized that people get such bad business advice from lawyers. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when people take business advice from lawyers.
Right.
Because they're like, well, you can't trademark that. Well, once it's in use in the market, you can protect it.
Yeah.
So people don't buy names that start with New York or LA because they're like, well, you can't trademark it.
Right.
You can't trademark LA and you can't trademark golf. Well, now that we're in the market, if you use LA Golf, I'll sue the hell out of it, right?
Sure.
So the point is, I really just followed my instinct. I actually didn't use dots as a shout out to Louisiana, but I love LA, and LA is a cultural center of the world.
Yeah.
And also we had Super Bowl and World Series and World Cup and everything coming to LA in the next 10 years. So I was really glad I didn't listen to my lawyers.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, a couple of questions. Is there a motto, a mantra, a quote that you live by or that you're top of mind?
I have about probably 8 to 10 mantras I quote every day. Probably one of my favorites is that the only thing between you and your goals is clear pathways to smaller goals. I try to make sure.
Wait, say that one more time. The
most dangerous thing between you and your goal is clear pathways to smaller goals.
Yeah.
And that's one I have on my mirror.
That's like the opportunity cost, right? Yeah. Okay. Favorite books. Is there any book that you've read that?
Absolutely. Willpower Doesn't Work. I've given that book to hundreds of people. It's about it's about environment, and he defines environment as the people you're around, the information you consume, and your physical surroundings, and how certain surroundings are unhealthy, certain surroundings are good for your creative brain, certain surroundings are good for you to focus on problem solving. And that book, there's even a lot of science behind the 5 people you spend the most time with,
right?
Define you.
But I mean, the gist of what you're saying is willpower doesn't work. It's like, if you don't want to struggle with this, move yourself.
His thesis is that if you're having to use willpower, then your environment's rigged against you.
Then you're in the wrong spot.
You're in the wrong environment.
You're in the
So
wrong
you're
environment.
having to use willpower.
So we're going to go back to the quote. It's only the view from where you sit that makes you feel defeat. Life is full of many aisles. Why don't you change your seat? What's preventing you?
I love that.
What's preventing you that's listening from moving to what you really want? Okay, I have one more question for you, and this is because I'm a parent, and parenting's not easy in these days. You have 4 amazing kids. I know you know it. Is that a Sophia thing? Is that a Reed thing? What's your strategy on parenting?
I would say there's obviously no playbook for raising, teenagers. There's no playbook for raising privileged kids. I grew up poor, right? There's no playbook. So I don't think it's a strategy thing. I think it's an alignment thing. Well, the thing I feel so blessed about is that from day one, we're aligned on general philosophy, right? I feel like if you have alignment on general philosophy of parenting, then everything else is about process. Process being when we have something we might disagree on about teenagers having sleepovers or something tactical,
right?
We take a long walk and talk for 2 hours. We take a long hike. We go to the fire pit in our neighborhood and talk for 3 hours. So but
the key there is alignment, but when you're not, it's communication and staying in that communication.
Habitual communication.
Communication.
We had a couple topics pop up in the last few weeks where I had a strong visceral reaction to something. And I was like, okay, I said, let's go to the fire pit. And so that night we went to the fire pit and I took a drink and a cigar and we talked for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Until we found some alignment.
And was it just a compromise? Just end in a compromise?
No, I always give in. No, I really do trust mom instinct a lot. So
yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate your time for being here.
This was so much fun.
This was fun.
I'm proud of everything you're doing.
And there's going to be a time we're going to do this again because I have a couple other guys where I want to do 3 or 4 of us.
That'd be fun.
In the next couple months. So thanks for joining us. Everybody watch. We'll see you next time. Thanks, brother.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to RUHM, presented by the Smith Group. This episode was hosted by Tim Smith and produced by Michelle Akers. Chris Stacy is our studio director. Editing by Jake Austin. Special thanks to Pacific Staging and Sandy Newport.